This is not too loud. Okay. Because the last thing I want to do is turn you deaf. Okay. So, I know that the topic was more about land surface properties, but I took the liberty of twisting it around and kind of bring it under the fold of my expertise. I'm going to not only talk about land surface properties, I mean, we could stop there. I mean, there's so much that one needs to know. But, I mean, those land surface properties go on to affect climate. And since there is a two-way interaction, climate affects certain land surface properties. So that's why I have turned it into a land-atmosphere interactions, a lecture on land-atmosphere interactions. Now, before I start, I mean, this is the first time I'm meeting all of you, and there is no opportunity to talk to you in person, maybe later. I just wanted to gauge where you are in terms of land surface. So let me ask you this question. Have you heard of the term evapotranspiration? Yes. Excellent. What does that mean?
The combined effect of evaporation and transpiration.
Okay, what is the difference between evaporation and transpiration? Maybe somebody else feel free to jump in.
Transpiration is in vegetation.
Transpiration is from vegetation, but evaporation is not.
It's from both plant and plant surface as well as.
Excellent. Okay. So if I want to hear from you, let me put this thing together, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong based on purely what you say. Transpiration is a purely biological process that occurs through plants, and evaporation is a physical process that just occurs from any open surface, right? And so the thing is that if I spill some water on this table, it's going to evaporate. However, just if you think of like a tree outside, and let's say it rains, versus the roof, which does not have any tree leaves or anything, and it rains over there. The evaporation from this flat surface, that is the roof of the building, is going to be very different from the evaporation from the tree. And why do you think that is the case? Take a wild guess. Evaporation, let's say it rains like this afternoon. Evaporation will occur on the roof as well as from the tree. What will be the difference between the two?
Plants are interacting with that water, but the land is not. So the water will interact on the roof, but because
Let me just.
it will be less on the plants. I think plants are interacting with that water, which is falling on the tree, but there is no interaction of the roof with that water.
Okay, let me hold on to that. You were saying something?
Surface area.
And surface area, that's a very good point. That I was thinking along those lines. So surface area, how is different between the tree and I think that going along the lines that you said, there are so many leaves and they are arranged like one after the other. So if you count the surface area of the leaves, that's going to be much more than the surface area of the roof. On the other hand, the leaves at the bottom do not get enough solar energy, so they are quite cold, so they may not evaporate as much. So most of the evaporations are probably going to occur from the top of the trees. So you understand the complexities now, right? I mean, just if we look at a very simple physical process like evaporation, that simple process like evaporation is affected so much due to the presence of vegetation. Okay, just by the difference in surface area. If we talk about difference in heat conductivity and heat capacity and things like that, obviously more and more complexities come. So this is the complexity that we are going to talk about. Okay. Now, I think I'm going to start with like three questions that we want to talk about in the first 1.5 hours. Why should climate scientists learn about the land surface? Then we will talk about how do we observe the land surface and interactions, and how can we build models that can simulate this land surface and atmosphere interactions. I'm going to look at 4 things, and this is basically why I think I am interested in the land surface as an atmospheric scientist. The first is that the land surface is an integral component of the Earth system. It affects energy, water, and carbon balance. It affects balance of other nutrients as well, but I'm just going to focus on carbon because that's so important for climate. One could talk about nitrogen and like other things which do affect the climate system, but I also want to finish everything in 90 minutes, right? One important concept that has come up in the last like maybe 10 years is the concept of memory in the climate system, and how land surface kind of acts as a memory for the climate system, where it stores information about past events and passes it on to future events. And then also we can talk about extreme events and stuff like that, time permitting. Okay, so these are the different components of the climate system. If you look at all of them, hard to read. Is this? Can you read it from back there? This is atmosphere. Okay. Okay. So biosphere, lithosphere is the rocks. Cryosphere are frozen like ice and glaciers. Hydrosphere is water. And troposphere is humans. Huh? So out of these 6, 5 of them can occur on land. That's why the land surface is so important for us who are interested in climate. Now these are like different kinds of processes that occur over land surface. I'm going to, for simplicity, break them up and talk about just 3 of these. Okay. So first, the energy cycle. Now, we all know that the atmosphere doesn't get, the sun is the source of all our energy, but it's not the direct source for the atmosphere, right? I mean, that you've seen this picture like many times, I'm hoping, in the course of these 2 weeks. You've done courses on energy balance and things like that, lectures.
Maybe first day,
Yeah? Okay. So you will notice that, quick recap, that out of like all the 340 odd watts per meter squared solar energy coming in, only about 20% of that is absorbed by the atmosphere. The rest goes to the atmosphere, and a large part of that is absorbed by the surface, and then that is transferred into the atmosphere as sensible heating, latent heating, and long wave, right? So that's why we call the surface as the largest direct source of energy from the atmosphere. The atmosphere gets more of its energy from the surface directly than from the sun. Second, right here. So, and this is the equation. So heat storage in the land, I mean, we can make it a negative and look at atmosphere as well. Basically, what is happening on the surface? What I said in the previous slide, if we put it in the form of an equation, we will see that this is the radiation that's coming in, downward short wave, downward long wave, minus upward short wave, upward long wave. So the net radiation that comes in, some of that, a small part of that actually goes into the ground. G. Most of it, as this is the evapotranspiration or the latent heat flux, and this is sensible heat flux. Sensible heat flux is transfer of heat by transfer of energy by heat. Like if I light a fire and set this table on fire, when I take my hands close to it, I feel warm. That's sensible heating. When you go out like in the summertime and walk barefoot on the ground, your bottom of your feet will feel hot. Why? Because the ground is hot in contact. You are absorbing that heat. So that's sensible. Latent heating is different. What happens is there is water in the ground, whatever, that water evaporates. And while it's evaporating, there is latent heat in the molecules of the water. So, land surface, whenever we look at land-atmosphere interactions from now on, we are going to look at what happens to this latent and sensible heating. Okay? So, even though the net radiation may be same, the balance between latent and sensible might change. And we will see how that balance, depending on the nature of the surface. For example, a rooftop of a building, to an agricultural field, to a tropical forest, to a snow-covered ice cap. This balance between lambda, E and SH, that's going to affect how the land surface interacts with its immediate environment. Now, again, now this is the water cycle, and if you look at this, the cycle here, you will see that about the amount of precipitation that occurs on the ground, on land, large part of it, almost 70% of it, is evapotranspiration from land. And the remainder is evapotranspiration from the transport from the ocean, is 40 units, okay? So, between 65 to 70% of the precipitation that falls on land actually comes from land. So, land is the largest direct source of moisture for the atmosphere on land, right? So, these are two things we are going to keep in mind. Land is the largest direct source of energy for the atmosphere over land. Land is the largest direct source of moisture for the atmosphere. And then finally, I keep on skipping. So this is again the equation for the surface water budget. Very simple. These storage terms are quite small, but they can have a very large impact. Essentially what I am saying is that there is precipitation falling on the ground. Most of it is evaporating back, about 65%, 70% of it. Evaporation, and as we saw and we discussed earlier, evaporation can happen from the trees, from the bare ground. This E actually represents ET, so it's also transpiration from the trees. Now, finally, carbon cycle. Okay? Ignore this ocean part again because we are doing land-atmosphere interactions. We see that whatever carbon is absorbed by the ground surface, most vegetation like trees or even grasses, soil also like bacteria in the soil, they also sequester carbon. And most of it is lost as respiration. Some of that is transferred into the soil and eaten up by bacteria in the soil. So if you look at again this equation for this, we will see that it's a balance between carbon dioxide absorbed for photosynthesis by the trees, and that is released as respiration. Right? When we respire, we emit carbon dioxide, same thing for the trees. This is quite very well balanced. Actually, there is also a lot of respiration from the ground. Recently, we started taking into account because people were ignoring this for the longest time. What happens is on the trees, they shed leaves. The leaves fall on the ground, they rot there. They are eaten by the bacteria, right? And so we have respiration from heterotropic respiration from and chemotrophic respiration from the ground as well. So it's a balance between photosynthesis and respiration. There is some geologic flux, weathering and stuff like that, okay? But that's quite small. Now, so these are three different cycles we talked about. These cycles are connected, right? If you look at these equations, then this is the energy and this is the water cycle. You'll see that both of them have evapotranspiration, right? So that's how energy and water cycle are connected. that evapotranspiration kind of overlaps both of these. Similarly, if you look at the water and the carbon cycle, they are connected through vegetation because the release of water during transpiration is a byproduct of photosynthesis, which is when plants absorb carbon dioxide. So that's why energy, water, carbon cycles, they are all connected. And since land plays such an important role in it, that's how land surface can influence the atmosphere, not only the local atmosphere, but we will see how it influences the global atmosphere as well. Okay? In fact, like people studies have suggested in this paper that most of the uncertainty in our estimation of the carbon cycle is due to our lack of understanding of evapotranspiration. So most of the, whenever I'm going to talk about uncertainties and things like that, you will notice that I'm talking about evapotranspiration. Because the sensible heating part we all know very well. We know that if I touch a hot object, I'm going to feel hot. If I touch a cold object, I'm going to feel cold. Know this very well. And the equations are very simple. However, evapotranspiration, you will notice, is a very, very complex thing involving a lot of uncertainties. So, let me put this together. What we have seen is again that the land surface is a direct source of energy and moisture for the atmosphere, largest direct source. And the cycles of energy, moisture and carbon are directly coupled. The key thing to keep in mind that what recent research shows that uncertainty in estimating evapotranspiration. That's one of the largest uncertainties that exist in terms of predicting the future of the carbon cycle, the predicting future land-atmosphere interactions, and predicting future climate as well. Okay, so let's keep our eye open for evapotranspiration. Any questions? Yes, please.
How can we treat the source of moisture? Whether it is coming from land or sea?
That's a good question. There are all these numbers that I showed, right? I have like this many kilograms per meter cube squared and things like that. These are hard to estimate, but the techniques often people do like the different types.
Isotope analysis.
Exactly. So you take samples and you do these kinds of isotope analysis to figure out where they came from. This again, it's hard to prove because sample collecting and lab analysis is expensive. A lot of people do what we call back trajectory analysis, like in models. So you can take a parcel of moisture and see how it travels through the system. So it's a mix of both physical lab-based work and numerical model-based work. These are all again estimates, but they are fairly robust. We know that they vary, but probably with a small percentage of error, of course. Again, for evapotranspiration, that's why it's very, very hard to do. All we have is an estimate, but as we will see later, that there are changes in sign. Okay. So now, I'm going to talk about scales in the atmosphere. Have you seen an image like this? Right? How many of you are familiar with the relationship between temporal and spatial scales in the atmosphere? I think I made this question sound more complex than it is. Let me rephrase the clarify the question, or answer the question in any case. So what this figure tells us is, so this is spatial scale, this is temporal scale. If I look at an atmospheric process, if it's a small turbulent eddy, the lifespan of that may be like around in this part of the spectrum. The lifespan of that will also be small. If I take a large system like a tropical cyclone, which is large, the lifespan of that will also be large. So you see that there is more or less a straight line. The larger the system, the larger the lifespan. Okay? And the problem is that it lasts, the range is huge. Microscale, this does not even include diffusion, which is like right here. But small microscale turbulence like thermals and things like that, of the order of like a tornado, okay? That would be like right here, okay? On the other hand, a tropical cyclone, it is maybe 1,000 kilometers wide and lasts for a week. So we have this huge range of time scales. But many of them are actually like in the weeks to months, hours to months, maybe a year. Now, if I look at the time scale of processes in the biological or the ecological systems, we see that again there are meteorological processes in the minutes to hours, but certain things take hundreds of years. Like if there's a forest fire, let's say, and all the trees are burnt up, then you have small grasses coming up. It becomes like big bushes, small trees, and then finally a tropical rainforest. The process will take like 100 years to start. If I look at the cryosphere, we see that when snow falls, it takes a few days to melt, but an ice sheet can last for 1,000 years. So as we can see that, even on the land surface, there are processes that start at like few seconds and they go on for 1,000 years. Okay. Now, here, land acts as a moisture storage, okay, that connects these different time scales. Like, I'll start with an example. Let's say there is a thunderstorm today outside. And typically, if there was no land, like over the ocean, the thunderstorm comes, and all the signs of the thunderstorm will be gone in 15 minutes or an hour or two. Okay? And then 3 days later, another storm will come, and it will rain. And these two events will probably be unconnected. I'm not being 100% true here. There are connections, but the connections are much more complex and nuanced. There will be no direct connection between two weather events. However, when you have the land surface, if there is a thunderstorm, the ground will stay wet, maybe for days, even weeks. And then when the next storm comes, the soil moisture is going to affect the ground surface, the thunderstorm. And there could be two possibilities. One could be that, there will be more evaporation, so the precipitation will be stronger. That's one possibility. The other possibility is if the soil is wet, it's going to be cold, so the storm will not be as strong. So it could go both ways, but it will affect a future event. Okay? And I'm going to talk more about this feedback later. But the important thing to keep in mind is a weather event today, through the land surface storage of moisture, will affect a weather event next week. Let's say there is a winter storm somewhere in the Rocky Mountains or the Himalayas. And what that snow is going to do, is going to accumulate over the ice caps and something like that. That snow is going to melt in May or June, right? And then maybe cause a flooding somewhere in West Bengal. So, just by since snow time scale is much larger, we have a winter storm. The effect of that can last for a season. Let's say, like as I said, that there is a flooding in West Bengal and devastating floods, the large parts of the Sundarbans are gone. And so there are no standing forests. Next year's weather will be affected by the lack of vegetation in the tropical mangrove forest. Okay? So what I'm trying to do with this example is show that how storage of moisture by the land surface can act as a memory of the system, whereby one particular event, the impact of that event can last for much, much longer than the lifespan of the event, okay, which would not be possible if there was no land surface. And indeed, people have looked at soil moisture, and they have seen that we know that weather prediction is done over the time scale of like a week, maybe, if at all. People have looked at soil moisture and they found that they can predict temperature 3 months ahead of time if you have good soil moisture. This is also another thing that up to 2 months you see an improvement of like maybe up to 20% by good soil moisture estimation and initialization. So because of this memory kind of function of the land surface, that we the influence of one particular weather or climate event tends to live much longer than the lifespan of that climate event. And we can use this effect, okay, to our advantage by building better models that can assimilate good quality land surface data that would allow us to do long-term seasonal scale forecasting. And then finally, another thing that I wanted to talk about is extreme events like flooding or forest fires, drought. These are all mediated by the land surface. So if I put these things together, I have answered to the first question. That the land surface is extremely important for the climate system, and climate scientists should incorporate knowledge of land surface in their analysis and definitely land surface processes in our models. Do you have a question or any questions? Yes, that is exactly what I was trying to show. Like, if you look at this figure, okay, in terms of temperature, we do a very good job. Any questions? Okay, that we can do a very good job of forecasting long-term temperature if we know the soil moisture well. In terms of precipitation, because of the question, we are not there yet. We do a good job with temperature, but not necessarily with precipitation. And that is because two different things can happen. And I will tell you in the next lecture that why it's harder for us to estimate the effect of precipitation due to feedbacks. Okay, I'll come back to that. Yes?
What is the time scale of memory effect by vegetation?
Memory effect by vegetation can be centuries. Why do I say this? It seems like a preposterous claim. The thing is that, let's say there's a forest fire, okay? Whether an event dry and then suddenly, somehow naturally a forest fire occurs. And the entire process is, forest is destroyed. Now what happens? Depending on the climate or the weather situation at that time, so typically after a forest fire, we have what we call primary succession of species coming up, and then secondary. Primary is mostly grasses. Secondary successions are small shrubs, and then tertiary successions are smaller trees, and then finally larger trees. But it would go in many different directions. Many different types of species can come up depending on the background weather conditions. So whether 100 years from now, like let's say there's a forest fire, a national forest in Nagarhole or somewhere, right? Then depending on the whether it occurs in the spring or in the autumn, we have different weather conditions. And actually we can end up with two different types of forest. So one would argue that the impact of the forest fire and the associated weather conditions determine the nature of the forest at the end. So in that sense, one can argue that the impact of that forest fire lasts for 100 years. In terms of direct weather variables, as we can see from the numbers that we can make these connections for several months at a time.
If monsoon fails a year, that will cause the less vegetation. So it could have an impact on less monsoon. Normally we get excess monsoon after a crop.
If there is a, that's a different question. I mean, but in principle, if the thing is that monsoons are extremely large events. I mean, the question that I answered was a theoretical question. It's unlikely to happen because there are other constraints on the atmosphere. The monsoon keeps on coming repeatedly, and the atmosphere has its own equilibrium states. So it will try to, the Earth system, try to produce some kind of fairly well-known equilibrium states. But under certain conditions, the atmosphere is a chaotic process where a small disturbance at the beginning can end into very large impacts towards the end. If there was a monsoon and the weather was dominated purely by convective storms, we are more likely to see these kinds of kind of very unstable system leading to different equilibrium. But if you have a system which is stable, monsoon happening every year, you are less likely to see these kinds of instabilities in the system.
In Pakistan, those cases, we can see none of this monsoon depression is going up to the, none of them is crossing this desert region. Is it due to this land surface?
No, I will not be able to answer that question. I think a lot of people have looked at it. The impact of land cover change or land cover on monsoons. I don't think that, that's not a settled question yet. There are possibilities if you look at numerical experiments, you will see sometimes, but in other experiments you don't. So I think that's a fairly open-ended question. It is quite likely that this is in a, I mean, there is no cause-effect relationship, it's probably a synergistic relationship between land cover and the monsoon. But the fact that the desert is not letting the monsoon in so far, I don't think there is a cause-effect kind of relationship. It might be the other way around, that just because the monsoon doesn't go that far, that's why we have a arid land. There are other reasons why arid lands are in the mid latitudes, westerlies and things like that, they get mostly continental. So there are other reasons. So my first part would be that no, it's probably the effect rather than the cause.
So actually this land or whatever we are talking memory effect, isn't it a local effect? Because everywhere you go, the type of vegetation, everything is going to change. So like rather than being a complete, it cannot represent entire India's like.
That's again a very important question. The answer is yes and no. In general, most of the time, the memory effect, it's probably mostly because I have not talked about biophysical and biochemical effects, but since it's purely biophysical effect, these are mostly localized, maybe in a regional case. I mean, it doesn't have to be something happens over Bangalore, maybe not in Bangalore, but it might spread over like a particular spatial scale and not go beyond that. Yes. But there are studies which show through atmospheric teleconnections that it can affect distant regions as well. So that process is still there. There are very few teleconnection studies, so there is no convincing or conclusive answer to this problem. Mostly local, but there is obviously, because the atmosphere is such a implicit fluid, that we have possibility of teleconnections affecting other parts of the world as well. Okay. Let me then move on to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, is observing land-atmosphere interactions. Because I talked about a lot of these kinds of possibilities. And I think I had questions that how do we know these kinds of things are actually true? We need to look at data, but that's where the challenge comes in. Because what I'm going to show is that The data that we have in terms of land surface is extremely poor and quite limited. That's why a lot of our understanding regarding land-atmosphere interactions are confined to only local scale things where we can measure. Things like teleconnections and remote impacts. We really don't have very hard evidence of them. So that's why I'm not saying that these things don't exist. We just don't have enough information to justify some of the possibilities. Okay? Now, so there are a number of key land surface variables that we are interested in. Obviously, albedo and temperature, moisture in the soil, roughness of the vegetation, leaf area index, which is extremely important for evapotranspiration. Most important thing for the atmosphere are these three fluxes, four fluxes: energy, moisture, carbon, and radiation. Okay, these are the fluxes that are responsible for supply of energy, moisture, and carbon to the atmosphere. That's why, to understand land-atmosphere interactions, this is probably the key thing that we want to get. Okay? If we don't have this information, we can measure these other things and try to estimate them from the other data. But the best thing would be to get the measure of the fluxes themselves. Now, let me just quickly skip over this. I mean, there are errors and this is more important. Now, two things that give us an idea about the data quality: resolution and coverage. Resolution is the frequency of the observations. Are you measuring it every minute? Are you measuring it every hour? Are you measuring it every day? Or are you measuring it every week? So that's the frequency of it. And also, are you measuring it like in one point in Bangalore and then another point in Beijing and then another? Or are you measuring it like in each and every town? So frequency can be both temporal and spatial. Coverage is the length of record. How long is your data? How much area does it cover? These are two things. We can have like a large area covered, but only with a few points. So that would be good coverage, bad resolution. We can have very high frequency data in one location, right? If you take an automated weather station, that's measuring like every second or maybe much higher. Very good frequency, but it just covers like, I mean, you take the data for maybe a week, and so that's a small coverage, good resolution. Now, when I say this, I'm just going to pull these two figures out. Okay? Let's look at the spatial scale. 1 meter to 10,000 kilometers. 1 second to, this is probably like, a decade. Okay? Wide spectrum. So now you get this point, right? Again, for ecological time scales, we see that minutes to centuries. So that poses a challenge, right? Land-atmosphere interaction scales of variability in time go from seconds to decades, like 50 years. In space, it goes from a meter to the entire surface area of or the entire perimeter of the Earth. That's tens of thousands of kilometers. Now, how do we, just to give you an example of, this is the variability diurnal cycle of the different terms in the radiation budget. You can see over the course of one day, 0 to 24 hours, there is so much variability, right? This is radiation. Radiation is 0 at, actually negative at night, and goes up to very strong positive during the daytime. Look at this. This is in the spring. These trees, and there are these crops in the winter. There's so much difference. Look at the spatial scale. The crops are placed very, very close by, right? But they cover hundreds of hectares. So ideally, this is what we want. Okay? We want instruments that are spaced about a meter apart, observing, taking records every few seconds. This is for maximum resolution. And obviously, it will cover the entire Earth. for many decades for maximum coverage. Clearly, I mean, this is a joke, right? I mean, this is not possible. We know this very well that we cannot do this. What we have is just two ends of the spectrum. We have station data that measures like automated weather stations and flux towers. They measure data of high frequency, but they measure only that station. On the other hand, we have satellite data that covers the entire world, but satellites pass over one location like infrequently, there is clouds. So most satellite data is available at every week. If you look at Modi's, for example, the frequency of Modi's data is 7 days or something like that, 5 to 10 days. Training also, it's about like 5 to 10 days. So even though it covers a large part of the world, it does not give you data at high frequency. So that's a challenge. Now, just to give you an example, this is the global soil moisture data bank, and you look at the coverage. These are point measurements. You know, there's like just a few points over India, nothing over Africa, South America, large parts of Siberia, I mean, like nothing over the Boreal region. In the US, it's mostly over Illinois, the state that I was in, and FluxNet. These are the ones that actually measure fluxes. That's even worse, right? There's nothing over India, right? India doesn't have a FluxNet network. So if you want to measure sensible yet weak flux, evapotranspiration, you know, something that is important, the questions that you are asking, if in the context of India, I cannot answer those questions because I just simply have no information. On the other hand, these are the weather stations, and this is the automatic rain gauge. It's very hard to see, but these are fairly well covered. Okay, so in terms of temperature, rainfall, radiation, we can get a reasonable coverage, but nothing in terms of fluxes. So that's why the flux estimates over India have so much uncertainty, because we don't know what the reality is. And this is Modi's coverage. It covers the entire world, but again, I mean, not at very high frequency. So land surface data is availability is a trade-off between good resolution and good coverage. So you have to pick your poison. When you are designing your own, let's say you go on to work for ISRO or NASA or IMD or whatever. When you are designing your own observation system, you have like enough money. You will have to make a choice that, look, these are the things that I want to understand, and these are the instruments that I need. And then you have to optimize. Do I need a long-term data? If you are an ecologist, you probably want one station measuring over years. If you are a boundary meteorologist, you probably want a very good flux tower. But again, I mean, this is something that you will have to optimize between resolution and coverage. Now, so I put this in the table. I think this is going to be a PDF which will be available to you later. So it's okay you are taking notes, but in case you miss, you can always come back to this. Okay. So as you see again, right, in terms of resolution and coverage, none of these are perfect. Important thing to keep in mind, they all serve different purposes. You cannot use a flux tower data to do things that can only be done with global scale satellite data, and vice versa. For example, the work that I do, I'm more interested in this kind of station data. And for the work that Professor Bala does, he is more interested in these kinds of large scale data. So that's a choice you will eventually make. Okay? So now we are done with this, and for the sake of any questions on data. I never found data very interesting anyway, so I don't blame you. In fact, my advisor, but data is very important. My advisor used to say this, that I do mesoscale modeling. And so everybody, whenever you run a model, you have to prove that it's a good model, is doing a good job. And so you take that model outputs and you compare it with data. And they should match in terms of statistics and other kinds of things. And what he used to say is that if your model doesn't match your data, then there must be something wrong with the data. And the reason is you are not being facetious. The thing is that often we do not use the right data to test the model. Okay, if you are running an isosceles model and you are running measuring turbulence, you cannot use the data from a satellite because it's so heavily averaged. When you are running a climate model, often you will see that people compare it with, say, some of the FluxNet data and say, we are getting this really good correlation between FluxNet data and the climate model. But these are not comparable. The FluxNet data measures one point. A climate model gives you a what? No, go ahead.
I just said that gives you the model data and gives you the data.
It gives you, if you compare, you want to look at one climate grid cell, right? 2 degrees by 2 degrees. Over India, it's 400,000 square kilometers. How can you compare a number that has been averaged over 400,000 square kilometers and to a data that's just measured over a point? Again, so very important thing to keep in mind, but I want to be brief about this anyways, because I want to talk about modeling, because that's due to the lack of appropriate data, especially in land surface, we really have to focus on models to give us the information that we need. So first, a land surface model is a piece of code that solves the equations for conservation of mass, momentum. I missed energy here, but it should also be energy. Basically, these three equations. Now, obviously, to solve these three equations, we need like all or other equations, and we will see how complex it gets. But this is the minimum thing that a land surface model will do. Okay, and two, if you look at a good solid climate model of today, a coupled model, the land module is going to take all meteorological variables from the atmosphere and give it the fluxes of latent heat, sensible heat, and carbon. That's the role of the land surface model. And so the complexity of the land atmosphere, land surface LSM will depend on how these fluxes are calculated. How much care we take in calculating the fluxes. Okay? Like we saw at the very beginning of the class. Will your land surface model be able to distinguish between evaporation from a tree versus evaporation from the roof? If you really want to make that distinction, you need to know the how many leaves are in that tree, right? What is the structure? How tall are the trees? A pine tree, for example, which is maybe 10 meters tall, has small needle-like leaves and this has broad leaves. Evaporation will be different from a pine, from that tree over there, that palm tree versus the tree right next to it. If I look outside, I see two different trees with totally different evaporation patterns. Will your land surface model be able to distinguish between these two? So that's the key thing. That's what takes a simple, like a 1,000-line code land surface model to something that's like 1,000,000 lines. Okay? Because we want to make that distinction and because it's important. The key thing that improvements that we are making over land surface models over the years are mostly by including biogeochemical processes and spatial heterogeneity. And we are not there yet. I mean, we need to keep on doing more of this. Okay? These are the two key things. So, this is a typical land surface model. I mean, it calculates surface fluxes. There are two methods. We will not look at these in detail, but I'll go talk about the hierarchy later. There is a drag method or there is an energy balance method. There are two fundamentally different methods. And the drag method uses just some known parameters, and the energy balance actually has the ability to incorporate plant canopy through this parameter called stomatal conductance and or canopy resistance actually in this case. 1 over RC would be the conductance. So that's calculated using two methods, Jarvis, which is a simple method, and Ball-Bearing Polars, which is a photosynthesis based method, and this is an empirical method. This is your typical land surface model. Any climate model that you will be using the future, if it doesn't have this, don't use it. Okay? So this is something that kind of the bare minimum in 2014. But how has it been over the last few years? So the initial land surface models were only biophysics. So these are the equations. The net radiation is calculated as, you are familiar with albedo and the Stefan Boltzmann law, emissivity and things like that. So this equation is familiar to you, right? Who doesn't know this or have not seen this equation before? You have seen this, like at least in the context of this, I'm sure you've seen it. So these are the two new terms I'm hoping I'm introducing, is to calculate the sensible heat flux. So this equation, what it does is, looks at it like more like a kind of an electrical circuit. It looks at amount of moisture in the soil, amount of moisture in the air. So soil moisture minus moisture in the air. If this term is positive, then there is more moisture in the soil and less in the air. That means there is a gradient, soil to air, and so moisture will evaporate. How do we connect the flux with the gradient? Is by this term called bulk aerodynamic resistance. So this is nothing but a coefficient. Okay? But that is kind of put in the context of like it is a circuit. As current flows from one end to the other, the resistance of the circuit slows it down, and that's exactly what happens in calculating latent heating and sensible heating. Okay? So latent and sensible heating both are dependent on the gradient. If the soil is warm and the air is cold, there is a gradient, and energy will flow in the form of heat from the soil to the air. But it's not going to be 100% efficient, and the efficiency is this bulk aerodynamic resistance. So this is the key thing. That's where we are going to make improvements. This is no plant canopy, okay? So the aerodynamic resistance is, it's something of a parameter that people found out and just kept on using it for every, like, you go over a desert, you have one number, you go over an urban area, you have another number. The hydrology was very simple, like whatever rain comes in, it stays there till the soil saturates and then it just goes up somewhere, we don't know. So that was a very simple LC. In fact, this works quite well. However, in the 80s we started realizing the importance of plant canopy. For example, the question that we answered at the beginning, even for a biophysical process like evaporation, canopy is so important. So people started incorporating canopy, okay, like this. And the bulk aerodynamic resistance that we had here is termed R sub A. Now, what we are doing is we are calculating that resistance, but we are adding this separately. The resistance due to the air, resistance due to the canopy. Okay, so we are adding another new term, the canopy resistance, and that is calculated with an empirical formulation. Laboratory experiments were done, and based on that, people came up with these numbers. So, unlike the bulk aerodynamic resistance, which is something that came out of Suki Manabe's head, now we have something that is actually from a lab. But again, it's constant, it does not vary. Like this tree will have the same canopy resistance, irrespective of its like 1 centimeter tall or 10 meters tall. Whether it has like 2 leaves or 1,000,000 leaves. Not realistic, but it's better than what we had. So again, as I said, that this is the main area of improvement. The second improvement is treating heterogeneity. Now as you see that we have a soil model with layers. It usually is like 2 layers they used to have, a topsoil and a bottom soil. So water could, like, instead of just sitting there could be a distribution of water. So there is more moisture aloft after the rain, and more the topsoil is wet and the bottom is dry after a rain event. After a few days, it reverses. So very simple things like that. Okay. So the evaporation pattern changes over time. Evaporation right after a precipitation event is very high. 10 days after the precipitation event, it's low. You think it's very simple, but it took a lot of effort to build this. Because remember, adding one layer in a model means you have to add that layer for every grid cell. So that increases your computational cost by like 5-10%, which is huge. Now, something that would take you 10 days to run, now takes 11 days. That's not a good thing. So 10% improvement, increase in computational cost is bad, but computers were also becoming faster, so they were able to balance this out. Finally, in the 90s, these are the kinds of models that I started working with, is improvement in the biological aspect. So now, the canopy resistance is actually connected with photosynthesis using a ball-bearing Polar's type scheme. So this scheme, it measures the amount of sunlight coming in, and then based on ambient temperature actually goes through the photosynthesis reaction to measure how much water will be required. So we are actually doing photosynthesis here. Okay? This is fairly realistic. Even though people did not do this at that time, but since you are doing photosynthesis with a little bit of effort, you can actually make these plants grow or die and things like that. That was not done. But at least photosynthesis was being simulated. So the water that is transpiring, it's not just due to the gradient. Okay? If you go back to this model, where the transpiration and evaporation is just the gradient between the soil moisture and the atmospheric humidity. Okay? So purely a physical thing. Here, it's actually a biological thing. There is photosynthesis happening, how much water is required, so that is a part of the transpiration. Okay? So that was another improvement. Finally, and also we had like very good hydrology. Another thing is the better treatment of radiation, and this is something that we talked about at the beginning. That if you look at the tree, right, you look at the leaves, the top of the leaves are lit by the sun, the bottom is not. At least they have two layers, so they have sunlit and shaded. These create a whole lot of difference in terms of computing the fluxes. Okay? And then finally, we have things that are being built right now, the fourth generation LSMs. There are multiple layers in the canopy. Okay? And so, when you have evaporation, it takes into account each leaf or in a statistical sense. What we call canopy air. So the air inside the canopy, which is very different from the air outside the canopy, and the difference between the two. And so moisture can transfer not only vertically upwards, it can go sideways. Because now we can distinguish between canopy air and outside air. Horizontal transport of water, very important. Another thing is the dynamic vegetation capability. What is that? So let me start with this very simple example that I've been using for some time. Is let's say there is a forest, catches fire, everything is destroyed. Then you have first like grasses coming up, then you have shrubs and small trees, and they keep on growing, and then finally you have a mature forest which may or may not look like this. If there are other disturbances, then it may not look like this, but it is a mature forest anyways. So now we have ecosystem processes that are represented in models. So actually you can run a climate model for 100 years, and you can say that you can use different scenarios. You can say that, okay, I'm going to cut down these trees in say the Pacific Northwest of the US. And what will happen to that? If there is a lot of carbon dioxide in the air, like a business as usual scenario, maybe the trees are going to grow faster. If it's a very liberal scenario or conservative scenario with little carbon dioxide, little warming, maybe the trees will grow slower. So instead of like large pine trees, we may end up with some sort of taiga type, mixed woodland taiga type vegetation. Okay, so this is a very interesting development which has happened over the last few years. Is we can run and see what the forests, for example, how they actually change. Instead of in the earlier versions, there is a forest, it stays a forest. There's nothing that changes it. But now, climate and forest are actually truly interacting. So, what allows us to, so that's a kind of now at least theoretically, we can address the question that I started at the beginning. That the atmosphere and the biosphere are integrally coupled. And the coupling occurs over time scales of a few seconds to centuries. Now with the fourth generation LSMs, we have, because of the dynamic vegetation capability, now we have that capability to do that. Whether we are doing a good job or not, I don't know. It's still in the works. But we have the capability to measure transpiration this very second. Okay? How much water is going to go out of that particular leaf into the atmosphere. 2, whether the tree is going to be standing 50 years from now. So we can do all that. And that's I think the major kind of development in these fourth generation LSMs. And the work is not complete, we need to keep on working on that. But there are many uncertainties, okay? One problem is treatment of horizontal heterogeneity. I talked about how we are treating vertical heterogeneity, right? By adding more soil layers, more canopy layers. So now we have, we can say that the soil is wet after a rainfall event and it dries out after a few days. But the bottom soil, it does not directly respond to each and every precipitation. So we know we have the capability to represent vertical heterogeneity well. Our capability of representing horizontal heterogeneity is quite bad. Like we talked about this earlier, like if we take a grid cell over India, like something typical, there's a post climate model, but a grid cell over India, and if it's like right here. So it incorporates like about half of southern India, Indian peninsula. With its own, like you have deep forests there somewhere, you have very heavily urbanized areas, you have intensive agriculture, you have coastal plains, all kinds of things. But it's all represented by one grid cell. Clearly, that's not an ideal scenario. So what we started doing is, we break up each grid cell into small patches. This percentage is like forest. This percentage is this percentage is like desert or agriculture or whatever. We calculate fluxes individually for each of these patches and then integrate them somehow. And there are two approaches. I'm not going to go into this, but there are two approaches to integrate these fluxes. Now, this is, for example, in the CLM 4.5. These are the different patches. Like if you look at a grid cell. First it checks it's how much is vegetated. Is there a lake or urban? If there is urban, how much of it is roof, how much of it is wall, how much of it is shaded, and how much of it is exposed. If it's a vegetation, it has soil and then different plant functional types. If it's crop, it can break it up into different crop types as well as if it's irrigated or not. So all these things are possible. Okay, we can go because land surface data is available from satellites at very high resolution. IISc satellites measure, I think they have a resolution of like a meter or even like inches actually, some of the spy satellites. So we have enough land surface data. So we can take that data and populate it into this model. And so that we can go really, really fine. So that's something that we are actually one of the major areas of development in representing horizontal heterogeneity. So, Now, the problem is that do we have that kind of data? For land surface, yes. But for fluxes, no. As we saw that we don't have enough data from flux nets. We have very little data on soil moisture. So that's the challenge. We have these capabilities, but can we do this well? We don't know that because we are not to compare it. So that's the next frontier. To get appropriate data so that we can calibrate and evaluate our models. Okay, so that's one of the major limitations of these land surface models. Again, like as an example, I show you the flux net site, and you see India is painted in red as inactive because there is no flux data over such an important tropical ecosystem. Here we have nothing. Over Africa there is nothing. Okay, even though deforestation is not that bad in Africa yet. But there are tons of people, millions of people who live there, billions actually. So that's the biggest challenge. And finally, vegetation dynamics and feedbacks. We will talk about this later. But dynamics, we don't still have that kind of quantitative information about vegetation dynamics. So in terms of modeling, so these are the two challenges. How do we incorporate better vegetation dynamics? We have the capability on paper, but it's still limited by our knowledge, but most importantly limited by our data. Okay? So in summary, for LSM, we know that we do a good job, reasonable job with some of the biophysical processes with LSMs. But due to the lack of understanding of actual ecosystem processes over long time scales, even the capability of land surface models are there, their performance is still uncertain. So that is going to be the kind of next frontier in land atmosphere interaction modeling. So I'm going to, I think, cover all the questions that I wanted to cover. Let me just again quickly summarize that what we saw. I hope I have been able to establish why land surface is important and why we need to know more about it, and most importantly, why we need to build models to incorporate in our Earth system models for climate change science. The key problem here, number one, is limited observations, because it's always a trade-off between resolution and coverage. And finally, our understanding of vegetation dynamics and feedbacks, which we will see a little bit in the next talk, is limiting the advance of land surface models. Okay. Any questions on what we've done so far? The goal of my talk was to mostly raise questions, as you saw. So, what kind of questions do you have?
So, now regarding the data set. The data set like PD set, moisture index, severity moisture index, and the other available moisture index. Is there any difference between this type of data set and the local moisture index data?
Can you just repeat the question? I didn't understand.
The data set like PD set, farmer dot severity index, and local moisture availability. So, is there any difference, or we may use this data set?
So this is a general question. I'm not going to talk about the power index, or there are many other indexes. So basically the question is that I guess you can look at one index and then you have some soil moisture data. The thing is that theoretically most of these indexes are already taking into account soil moisture. Now soil moisture is just only one aspect of drought, right? There are many other aspects of drought in the sense that you can have fairly wet soil, but if the air is extremely dry, the soil is going to dry out. You may have a lot of precipitation, but if it happens over very porous soil, then the water will leach out. So soil moisture is just one component of many of these of the drought indices. And in particular drought severity, that measures the length also, like how many days it has not rained. So I think that there are many different ways, because drought is such a complex phenomenon. So that's why there are many different ways this information can be integrated. I will not say that one, I have not personally looked at, compared all these indices, but there are studies around which compare like 5, 6 different indices. I can try to find out some of these for you. But the thing is, you will notice that some of them will do well in one region and some of them will not do well in others. Very simple index which just looks at like the day since last rain. In many cases that has worked very well. And you have very complex indices which takes into account humidity and large scale processes like pressure, for example, which predicts whether a frontal system will come. Some of these indices maybe do very well in the mid latitudes, because where the climate, weather is driven by these fronts, and will not do very well in tropics where we mostly have convection. So my answer to that is that I think you should choose your index carefully, because one particular index is not going to do a good job in different climate regimes. And soil moisture is only one part of drought. So there should be a positive correlation between the index and the soil moisture, but do not expect a linear correlation.
From past 2 decades, people are working on estimation of soil moisture in the passive micro radiometer, and global data sets are also. So why can't we use that data set in the model?
That is true. I mean, there are multiple, first of all, ways to measure soil moisture, right? There is GRACE also, which uses gravity, which I think is probably the latest. It measures the gravitational pull, the small kind of deflections in the Earth's orbit, and to get an idea of soil moisture. So yes, there are many different ways of remote sensing soil moisture. And these are indeed used. Many models are absorbing remote sensing soil moisture. The key thing is that there is never any substitute for going, digging a hole, taking the soil out, putting it upon calorimeter and measuring the amount of moisture in there, because that's the true soil moisture. Everything else that we get from satellites are indirect estimates. And indirect estimates mostly in terms of, apart from GRACE, others are mostly in terms of radiative properties, right? That's what a satellite is doing. So we need that satellites, the data, to be calibrated well with real soil moisture. The problem is when you have so few soil moisture sites, how good is your calibration? If you do not have any data over Congo, rainforest for example, or the Sahel, which is very important in terms of land atmosphere interactions. If you do not have any data, your calibration is going to be poor. So that's what we suffer from. That we did, as I said, like again with the LSMs, that we have in terms of technology, we have a lot of capability. Now, I will tell you this, like when I was a kid, we did not have a mobile phone. So we had landlines. It used to take us like 10, 15 years to get a landline, right? So now that we have this technology, we think, I was staying in the IISc guest house and they have cut all the phone lines. Because one uses a phone, everybody comes to the mobile. Now, I noticed I had no signal in the guest house in my Vodafone. So I was not able to get in touch with anybody. So you see, that's the thing, we have new capabilities, but those capabilities need to build on something. And some of these things also need to be there as redundancy. So that's the problem. In the model we have this capability, but if there is no link to the past, so now we don't really know whether it's good or bad. It doesn't. It could be just garbage in, garbage out. Maybe the data might be totally meaningless unless I calibrate it properly. I will never be able to tell. So that's why we need soil moisture data, and that's why people are very skeptical about assimilating remote sensing soil moisture data, because they have not been calibrated well. We do not have problems in assimilating vegetation or land surface temperature data because they have been well calculated. But the problem with soil moisture is quite unique in that sense. Achha, we have 15 more minutes left and I wanted to do something. I know that if you have questions, how many people do we have? Like close to 50? How many? 44. Yes. Can we break up into, like we have 15 minutes, can we break up into 11 groups, 4 people each? And I want you to give me, now I know that some of you will go on to do your PhDs or whatever in your own disciplines, but some of you will be interested in working on climate science. Give me 3 questions that you think are going to be important for in terms of land-climate interactions. 3 questions that you would like to be, that you might want to address if you want to decide to do a PhD or a postdoc or something. Or you might want the climate community to address so that would be satisfying your curiosity. Maybe you feel there is a need for it, whatever it is. Maybe we can start by 4 people in each team, and like maybe the 4 of you right here. This is a good row, so we can break up into teams of 4, and then get 11 of these out. I know those 2 girls are not interested, but I'm hoping you will be open.